Welcome to Potty, May 04, 20. So today we're diving into something that's honestly keeping a lot of developers up at night. The copyright nightmare around AI-generated code. We've got headlines asking who owns the code Claude wrote, and researchers doing systematic studies of these new agentic coding tools. Plus, there's this whole market fragmentation happening with Claude, Code, Cursor, and a bunch of alternatives, all taking completely different approaches. Jordan, I gotta say, this feels like one of those moments where the technology is moving way faster than the legal framework can keep up.
Yeah, and Sam, what's really striking to me is that we're not just talking about autocomplete anymore, right? These are full-blown agents that can understand entire code bases and write substantial chunks of code autonomously. But before we get into the copyright mess, can you break down what's actually different about these agentic tools? Because I think a lot of people are still thinking of this as fancy tab completion.
Exactly, and that's the key distinction here. So traditional tools like GitHub Copilot started as essentially smart autocomplete. You type a comment or start a function. It suggests the next few lines. But these agentic tools, they're fundamentally different beasts. Claude Code, for instance, works as a CLI agent that can execute multi-step coding tasks, understand your entire codebase context, and basically operate with significant autonomy. You're not just getting suggestions, you're getting a coding partner that can reason about architecture, debug complex issues, and write substantial features from scratch.
That's wild! So we're talking about AI that can actually think through problems and write meaningful code blocks, not just fill in the blanks. But that makes the ownership question so much more complicated, doesn't it? Like if an AI writes 100 lines of code that solve a complex algorithm problem, who owns that intellectual property?
And that's exactly where things get messy. There's a post from LegalAir with the headline, "Who owns the code Claude wrote?" And the summary suggests that code generated by these agentic tools might be completely uncopyrightable. Think about that for a second. If the code can't be copyrighted at all, that creates this weird legal void. Or alternatively, it might be owned by your employer under work-for-hire rules, which is its own can of worms. My read is that we're in this unprecedented situation where companies are deploying tools that generate potentially significant intellectual property, but nobody actually knows who owns it.
Wait, so you're saying there's a real possibility that AI-generated code just exists in this legal no man's land? That seems like it would create massive business risks. I mean, if you're a company building your product on code that might not be copyrightable, what happens when a competitor just copies it? Or what if you can't properly license your own software because the ownership is unclear?
Exactly! And it gets even weirder when you consider licensing compliance. There's discussion on Hacker News about this, pointing out that if these AI tools trained on open source code with specific licenses, you might still be bound by those licenses even if the generated code isn't directly copyrightable. So you could have code that's simultaneously uncopyrightable and still subject to GPL or Apache license requirements. It's like this legal Schrodinger's cat situation. What really concerns me is that a lot of companies are probably using these tools without fully understanding the intellectual property implications.
Okay, that's genuinely terrifying from a business perspective. But let's talk about what's actually happening in the market, because it sounds like there's some major competition and fragmentation going on. You mentioned Claude, Code, Cursor, and others. What's the landscape looking like?
So there's this really interesting analysis that breaks down how the agentic development environment market has fractured into three completely different approaches. Warp is trying to reimagine the terminal as an AI-native workspace. Cursor is transforming the traditional IDE into an agent-powered editor. And Claude Code strips everything down to just a CLI agent that works in any terminal. Each of these represents a fundamentally different bet on how developers will actually work with AI in the future. It's like watching three different visions of the future duke it out in real time.
That's fascinating! So it's not just about who has the best AI model, it's about completely different philosophies of human-AI interaction. Which approach do you think is winning? Or is it still too early to tell?
From what I can see in the comparisons, Claude Code seems to be leading in raw code quality and deep code base understanding. The analysis suggests it excels at those complex single-threaded tasks that require really comprehensive understanding of an entire project. But here's what's really interesting. There are reports suggesting that Cursor, Claude Code, and Codex might actually be moving towards some kind of composable stack approach, where you have distinct layers for orchestration, execution, and review. That suggests the market might be maturing beyond the current fragmentation.
A composable stack? So, instead of these monolithic tools, you'd mix and match specialized agents for different tasks? That actually sounds really appealing from a developer perspective. You wouldn't be locked into one vendor's entire ecosystem.
Exactly! And that ties into something I'm seeing with all the alternative tools popping up. There are headlines about top 6 Claude Code alternatives and mentions of open source options with local model support and no usage limits. This suggests developers are already worried about vendor lock-in and want more control over their AI coding workflows. My prediction is that we're going to see standardized protocols for AI coding agent interoperability emerge by 2026 or 2027. Think of it like how APIs became standardized. Eventually, you'll be able to mix the best orchestration layer from one vendor with the best execution engine from another.
That makes a lot of sense, especially given how fast this space is moving. But going back to the copyright issue, do you think we'll see any resolution to that legal uncertainty anytime soon? Because it seems like companies are just charging ahead despite not knowing who owns the code.
Honestly, I think the legal frameworks are going to lag behind the technology for a while longer. But here's my other prediction. I think we're going to see the emergence of AI-generated code insurance products, or industry-standard legal frameworks, within the next 2 to 3 years. Companies are going to demand some kind of legal protection when they're building critical systems on AI-generated code. It might be insurance products that cover IP disputes, or it might be industry consortiums that establish clearer ownership standards. The business risk is just too high for this to stay unresolved much longer.
AI-generated code insurance. That's actually brilliant. I never would have thought of that, but it makes perfect sense. Companies need some way to manage the risk while the legal framework catches up. So what should developers and companies be doing right now while we're in this uncertain period?
Great question. My take is that you need to be really intentional about your AI coding tool strategy. First, understand what type of tool you're actually using. Is it traditional autocomplete or a full agentic system? Second, document your usage and keep clear records of human versus AI contributions to your code base. Third, talk to your legal team about IP policies around AI-generated code before you're knee-deep in a critical project. And honestly, this is one of those areas where you really need to do your own research on the underlying legal frameworks in your jurisdiction, because this stuff is evolving rapidly.
That's really solid advice. It sounds like we're in this fascinating but risky transition period where the technology is incredibly powerful, but the legal and business frameworks are still catching up. Thanks for breaking this down, Sam. This is definitely one of those topics I'll be keeping a close eye on.
Absolutely. And look, this is just the beginning. We're watching the future of software development get written in real time, with all the excitement and uncertainty that comes with that. Keep an eye on how these copyright questions get resolved. Watch for those composable stack developments, and definitely stay informed about the legal implications for your own projects. The next few years are going to be wild.